Okay. Maya aliki alako apoloa.
Wahaya.
Continue. I know I keloha ya kako pakahi a pauloa in nakanaka. Greetings to all. I see that you're rolling in here. My name is Taupuri Tangaro, and I am a member of the University of Hawaii 10 campus system. My primary campus is Hawaii Community College, together with the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And this Mokolele is brought to you and is sponsored by these two institutions. It's a great time to be in the University of Hawaii system. Why? Well, because we're transforming. We're the system, not me, but the system is now beginning to realize the value indigenous ways of thinking and doing and building relationships, how the value that can assist the university in becoming an institution to better serve the diversity of our growing communities. And so this movement is called Hawaii Papo Keao, the commitment, the strategic commitment to indigenize how we serve our communities and to ensure that there's equity in all of its levels of academia. Mo Kaulele is a cultural platform that the intention is to bring stories forward, stories of individuals. So Mo Kaulele doesn't necessarily speak on behalf of a whole nation, or it really focuses on the individual journey, and sometimes a journey in this Mo Kaulele, the journey within the context of art, or how does art and a personal journey, how do they feed leadership, personal leadership, indigenous leadership, community leadership on all levels. We have expanded our focus to include language. This season, this is the first time that we have our indigenous Rikyu language as a framework, a context to look at leadership, the growing of leadership. Language is an art. And for us, art is the intersection where the spirit and the physical worlds communicate. So what is the role of indigenous language in the spirit awareness of an individual, of a community? So that's Mo Kaulele. The intention of Mo Kaulele is to help our students, our Native Hawaiian students, our underserved students, all students see themselves through the story of another person. Sometimes it's easier to see ourselves when we're looking at someone or listening to somebody else's story. It's like sometimes it's hard to stare in the sun, but it's easy to look into the moon and to know that the light in the moon is really a reflection of the sunlight. And so we're sharing this story to help you see yourselves in journey, to see yourselves in a larger calling. That's one of the things that help our people succeed in academia, when it's not just about getting a degree, but getting a degree because there's a higher calling to serve the community, the well-being of that community. My name is again Tangaro, and I would like at this time, before I do, if you have questions, put it in the chat, and periodically we'll check those questions. And hope this conversation, this is by all means, this is not the beginning and the end of a conversation. We would like for you to continue this conversation. I especially am giving a special welcome to many of our Okinawa, Hawaii relatives here on this platform. And thank you for being there. I know your spirit must be so excited to be speaking or being to learning again about the language that is in your marrow. I would like to introduce Misato-san and Heis. Misato Matsuda is a little easy to say, but Heis has I'll let him here pronounce his own name because you deserve to hear what his name sounds like in his native language. Can you introduce yourselves and what you do, please?
やから。
ぐすよ、中がなびら、まぜたんがろうしんし、くいかきてとらしんそうち、にへやいびん、あんさにぐすよん、もうちとらしんそうち、にへやいびんど、にへやいびんどん、まねみさとり、松田みさとんり、いちょいびん。マリユンタンジャスビウトーティマリアビタン。Hi, everybody. My name is Misato Matsuda. First of all, we would like to thank Tangaro Shinshi for giving us such a wonderful opportunity to share our story. And to everybody, thank you for making your time to be here. I was growing up in Sobe, Yomitan village in Okinawa. So that area is 60 minutes driving up north from Shuri Castle. So I'm very excited. We are very excited to share our story with you.
Hallo iedereen. Mijn naam is Gijs van der Lubbe. Ik kom uit Nederland. Ik kom niet uit Okinawa, maar dat kan je aan me zien. Ik werk op de Internationale Universiteit van Okinawa en ik doe taalkundig onderzoek naar de Ryukyu-talen. Professor Tangaro, hartelijk dank voor de uitnodiging. En iedereen hartelijk dank dat jullie naar ons verhaal komen luisteren. For all the poor souls who don't speak Dutch, I will give an English translation of what I just said. My name is, in Dutch, Gijs van der Lubbe. I'll let you get away saying Gijs van der Lubbe. I am from the Netherlands. I'm not Okinawan. You may have guessed that. I work at the at Okinawa International University. I'm a linguist. I do descriptive linguistic work on Ryukyuan languages, mostly Northern Ryukyuan languages. And me too, I would like to thank Professor Tangaro for inviting us to tell the story of the Ryukyuan languages and the Okinawan language in particular. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to our story.
Okay, mahalo. Now, the first time and we're going to call this the hua, the very beginning, the conception. When was the first time you learned of or became aware, conscious of Rikyu language? Misato-san, how did you become aware of that language?
So in my childhood, it's because my grandparents and also my parents, they use Okinawa language, Uchinaaguchi, when they talk to each other. So maybe that time I was already aware of listening to Uchinaaguchi. Yeah.
Okay. And Heis, for you, when was your conceiving of this awareness?
I started studying Japanese when I was 19 years old, which is already 20 years ago. And well, from the outside, languages and countries, they look like these monolithic things. So when I started studying Japanese and learning about Japan, I learned that there used to be something as a Ryukyuan kingdom in what is now Okinawa Prefecture and part of Kagoshima Prefecture, and that Japanese was just not the only language in Japan. And since I like languages, I thought that was very interesting and I wanted to know more. So that's where it started for me.
Okay, so one was domestic yeah, within the home, within the family. The other one was through an academic process. Okay. Now, Misato-san, what, the ha'alele, at what point did you decide, the ha'alele means a departure point. So at what point did you decide, I'm going to begin learning this language?
Yes, again, in my childhood, because my grandparents and parents speak in Uchinaaguchi each other. So because and also the Okinawa, in Okinawa, we have so many traditional events, and then we get all the family members get together so many often. So one time, when my family members and my grandparents and relatives having lunch, my grandpa likes to make jokes all the time. So that time he was making something funny, saying something funny in Uchinaaguchi. And then everybody except me and my sisters laughed. Then my father translated into Japanese to me, but I still didn't get it. So I thought, oh, maybe jokes or humor in Uchinaaguchi and Japanese would be different. So I need to learn Uchinaaguchi to communicate with my grandparents and parents. But I just didn't make time to learn it for a long time.
So
Yeah.
what language were you speaking? If you weren't not speaking Uchinaaguchi, what language were you speaking? Or your
So,
community speaking?
yeah, that was Japanese
Oh, it's Japanese.
most of the time. And then it's called Uchina Yamatoguchi.
Okay, Yamato.
Uchina Yamatoguchi, that's gonna be some Japanese, but some vocabularies would be in Uchinaaguchi.
So that is interesting that there is a family event or a festival and somebody tells a joke and it's a joke that got you go, I, it caught you, it got your attention and it grew a consideration. I got to learn it. But you said you took a while to actually, this is interesting. What we want to do and when we begin doing them, sometimes there are many years. So may I ask, how old were you when you heard this joke?
I don't remember,
You
but
were
maybe,
a child?
yeah, maybe 8, 9, teenager.
Teenager, yeah. And then and now you're growing. You're actually in the movement, in the learning. So do you remember the joke?
I don't, because I didn't get it. So yeah, and then that was so many times. My grandpa was making some jokes in Uchinaaguchi so many times. So it's I don't
I
remember.
love that. You know why? Because this whole platform, kaulele, it honors a trickster whose name was Maui, who made jokes continuously. And he always tried to undo what other people did. He always came in through the back door, through the window. This the role of joking, not formal language, not formal singing, but joking got your attention. Beautiful. Heis,
Yes.
at what you came to learn Japanese language, then you got exposed to the Rikyu Kingdom language. What was it about the Rikyu Kingdom language that made you go, I think I want to investigate further this?
Well, yes. Well, the first time I really heard any spoken Okinawan, just a short sentence really, was when was the first time I went to Japan as an exchange student. I was in Nagasaki, and I did a part-time job at this theme park called Huis ten Bos, which is a Dutch theme park. The theme is the Netherlands, which is hilarious, of course. And one of my colleagues was from Okinawa, and we were talking about how the local language of Nagasaki is still Japanese, but it's different than the Japanese you see in textbooks. And so I asked my Okinawan colleague, so how's that on Okinawa? I hear that you have something different going on there. How different is it? And she said, oh, it's totally different. So I asked her, how do you say, what are you doing in Okinawan? In Japanese, it's nani shiteru no? Nani shiteru no? What are you doing? And then she said, nuusou da. And nani shiteru no? And nuusou da. It's completely different. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. I need to get into that. However, there were hardly any opportunities to really get into learning Uchinaaguchi, especially not in the area of Japan where I was. So I thought, okay, I'll get to that. Many years later, when I wanted to do an MA in linguistics, I remembered that. I thought, okay, there's something interesting going on in the Ryukyuan Islands. So I contacted this German professor, Patrick Heinrich, who had written several articles on the social linguistics of the Ryukyus and how the languages there are endangered. And that made me think that, okay, if I want to do something academically with languages, this is something that is interesting, because it's something, if you want to do it, you have to do it right now. So that already gives it a certain meaning. So that's how it really started. And this professor got me into touch with someone from Kumejima, which is an island 3 hours by ferry from Naha, from well, nowadays the capital of Okinawa Prefecture. So I went there for 3 weeks. I did field work with traditional speakers, and just the way they, well, I shouldn't talk too long, but they were so nice, and they were so welcoming to me as well, and they really appreciated that I was trying to learn something about their language. And but just the fact that they really accepted me was also, that meant a lot to me, because I don't look Okinawan, but still they were just talking normally to me. And once they knew that I knew Japanese, they would speak Japanese to me. Of course, my Okinawan wasn't really, I couldn't really speak Okinawan yet. But yeah, just the fact that they were so welcome, that is what sucked me into it, really. Then I thought, okay, I want to not just do an MA, but I also want to do a PhD well, about something that has to do with Ryukyuan linguistics.
So what I'm doing is I'm just quoting certain things that you're saying, both of you, and I'm putting it in the text box. And these are the things I want people to really, they're important pieces of the conversation, of the story, that sometimes get sidetracked. But they're the ones that, one of them is, if you have to do it, you have to do it right now. So there's an urgency. And in Hawaii, we have a different way of acting on urgency. The lava can be, when the lava is coming down the mountain, we don't run. The lava moves a little slow. So some of us clean the yard, clean the garden. So when the lava comes, and some people cook the food, clean the house. And so we know we have to get out, but we don't rush, which sometimes in this modern world can work against us when we think that there's always a tomorrow. And so we have to find when to use there is a tomorrow and when there is only today. And we need both worlds, and because we want to have access to that. Interesting, your capital in modern day Okinawa is called Naha. And maybe one day we'll show you. We have a naha here, and it's a sacred stone. It's a big one, and so we'll talk about that at another time. Alrighty, so the fact that when you actually came to the island and you met with the community, they were so welcoming that that is what sucked you into it. So it was never just now a rational, oh, I want to go and help a native people keep the language alive. Now it became personal. And so how do we personalize? Where does the personalization play in this movement? So your huakai. So again, your hua, the beginning, where it began, for Misato-san, domestic, and for Heis is the academic. The ha'alele, when you began to consider moving in this direction, Misato-san, it came through humor, the famous Okinawa humor. And we have that till today in Hawaii. And then for Heis, it was, well, what are you doing? There's something that you can do. There's an urgency. If I'm gonna go and do something in academia, make it count. Yeah, that was that ha'alele. Now you're huakai. This is your journey. You're making it count. You're now beginning to understand and work in that language system that once fed that humor, that the little hook that hooked you into it. So what is your journey like? How do you use, well, what are you doing with the language? What do you, Heis, do with the language? Misato, what do you do? How do you learn the language? How do you grow the language? How is your community responding to it? Does it have government support? How do the old people feel about young people learning a language? Some old people get offended when people can't, sometimes they get offended, so they rather not hear it than hear it wrong. And then sometimes in Hawaii, you have some of the older ones that even if you say it wrong, at least you've attempted to. Maybe tomorrow you'll do a better job. So what is your story like right now, your huakai, your day-to-day journey?
So yeah, as I said, yeah, I always wanted to learn Uchinaaguchi, but I didn't make time. When this guy came to Okinawa, so when I was doing my master's, and Hayes came to Okinawa to do his PhD, so we took a same class about foreign language education using multimedia. So we learned how to make materials for foreign language education using media. And that time, our professor told us that, oh, you don't need formal textbooks to teach languages. You can learn, you can create your own materials as freestyle. So then it opened my eyes. So I thought, oh, I can learn Uchinaaguchi in the way I want it. So I can create my materials by myself. But I need somebody's support. So Hayes. Then in 2013, we established a study group. It's called Uchinaaguchi Shutoku Binchōkai. Yeah, Hayes is a teacher and I'm a student. Then we started with the beginners class and the intermediate class once a week. And the venue was one of the classrooms in the University of the Ryukyus.
Yeah.
Then each session is about 3 to 4 months. Then we made handouts and we took videos of native speakers to share these materials with the study group members. Then most of the participants, group members, were students from University of the Ryukyus. But they're from, some of them are Uchinanchu, and then some are from mainland Japan or overseas. So yeah, it's I think successful very much.
Urihichi eikan satu kan.
Yeah. And then this is very good for learning Uchinaaguchi, and having this kind of opportunity to study Uchinaaguchi is very good for only not good for it's not only good for participants, but also maybe their family members to think about Uchinaaguchi seriously. So I think this study group is very good. But yes, of course, there's some setbacks. So for me, it took many years to get a positive reaction from my family members. But interestingly, they gave a good reaction to Hayes. Yeah, so I interacted with my grandma a lot about this kind of Uchinaaguchi, because I thought, oh, she could be my Uchinaaguchi teacher. So when I talked about our study group to my grandma, it's about how our study group, how cool our study group was, and then Hayes and I created and established everything. And my grandma said, oh, why don't you learn more English? And then, the other day, then when I tried to speak Uchinaaguchi to my grandma, she said in Japanese, oh, your Uchinaaguchi doesn't sound right. Yeah. So then I have one more funny story. My grandma had to take surgery several years ago. Then after the operation, I went to the hospital to see how she was doing. And I opened the door, and then she was sleeping, but she just woke up for me. And then the first thing she said, she was like, "You, why don't you speak Uchinaaguchi well, but Hayes does?" So I was speechless that time. I love my grandma. I was speechless. I didn't say anything. But that time, I thought, oh, this person is Yanahame. Yanahame is a super, super bad word. In Uchinaaguchi, you never want to say this word to anybody. What does that mean?
Old hag.
Old hag. So,
Yeah.
so please don't take notes right now. But at that time, yes, I love my grandma, but yeah, that person is Yanahame.
And
Yeah.
You know,
it also put me in an awkward position, because I don't want to make anyone look bad. Because, well, and I think it's clear from Misato's story right now that learning Uchinaaguchi is an entirely different experience for actual Uchinanchu, for actual non-Uchinans, than it is for an outsider.
Correct. And so, you know, no judgment on your grandmother, because we have many of those grandmothers and grandfathers still in Hawaii. And, you know, and it's their conditioning. It's the way they're reared. It's the way they've placed value. So we can't place a judgment on that. We just got to figure out how to work within their judgment system, which is sometimes it seems that they can support foreigners. The judgment system is designed to support the journey of a foreigner, then sometimes the ones most closest to them. Very, very similar in Hawaii. You know, part of a similar movement, can I ask a question? How many native speakers do you actually have at current, do you think, round number?
Shall I answer this?
Yeah.
Okay. It's very hard to put a number on it. But depending on the locality, I'd say that where Misato is from, generally men over 50 can speak Uchinaaguchi. And for women, it's over 60. In more urbanized environments, so like Naha and Shuri, they're way older, the traditional speakers.
Okay. And so this is an interesting thing, because many in the 1980s we began our revitalization of Hawaiian language. Same thing, and because it came through the linguistics. So, you know, of course, you're learning indigenous language from home, and then you're learning it from a linguistics framework in the college, it's going to sound different. And that's not similar. They used to call it the University Hawaiian. That's called the University Hawaiian. Some of us are offended by it. Some of us are like, at least we have that language, because, you know, again, there was a time when the generation was convinced by the social construction, the construct of the time, that there was absolutely no value in the Hawaiian language, and that if you wanted to succeed, you needed to speak English. We were even told, this is in the 70s, if you're going to learn a language, why don't you learn Japanese? That's what we were told. Why don't you learn Japanese? Because tourism was booming and the Japanese were coming, and you're going to get, that's how you're going to make money. Many of our indigenous members were not supported by their families, not all, but many. There's a criticism, and oftentimes it was easier to support people not so close to you. And so it is a cultural thing, but also some people, if you were not colonized, it might be a difficult thing to try to grasp, but colonized communities, we all have this in common. You know that. And then as a child, we heard people speaking Hawaiian, the old people, and we just thought it was an old people's language. We never was inspired to go, I want to sound like them, because we were dancing hula. We're dancing the language. We wanted to dance because it got us out of the village. It gave us a challenge. We got to be seen, we got to experience. But to speak the language, we thought, yeah, that's what old people do. And we never saw ourselves, you know, when you're young, you never see yourself as old. So you assume they're gonna live forever. You never understand that if you don't speak the language, they will die. I wanna, so thank you, Misato, for being very candid. There are a lot of emotion when you try to recover, and, you know, and sometimes what we're prepared to deal with outside pressure, we can deal with that. Fighting the foreigner, we have a saying, fighting the foreigner is easy. It's fighting the relative that's hard, because of our emotion and our culture of the need to respect. So thank you for sharing that story. There are many of us that used to think, oh, we used to dread when we see this old woman coming that used to just like correct everything. We didn't even say anything and she would just correct us. You know, we have those, but we also had some really generous old people in the community.
I understand how my grandma feel and how they feel, because they experienced horrible war. So yeah, learning Uchinaaguchi would not help people to make money.
Yeah.
And grandparents knew poverty and hunger, so they wanted their children and grandchildren to live better and more comfortable lives. So I really understand. And Japanese was considered as a valuable asset in setting a good job, but not, Uchinaaguchi was not. So I really understand how they feel. But yeah, somehow, then that time I somehow thought that the expectation from native speakers of me speaking Uchinaaguchi is both low and high at the same time. But the expectation from Case is lower. So they assume that I know nothing, but when I try to speak, it's not good enough for them. So I thought I wanted to speak in Uchinaaguchi with native speakers, but if I wanted to speak Uchinaaguchi with native speakers, then my proficiency level needs to be high. Then somehow I thought that then, okay, there's Hayes is very good at speaking Uchinaaguchi, so let's utilize good resources. Hayes gets along with my grandma a lot, very well. So why can't I use this guy? Yeah.
Yeah, might as well. Hayes, can you share with us your experience being non-Indigenous in an Indigenous space, not just attempting to learn Indigenous language, but now being identified as a promoter, as a resource, and used at least by one person in your community, Misato, to better relationships within the generations.
Well, it's really funny how it turned out that way. Like I just said, it started for me as an academic pursuit. So, and then the only pressure there is well, from yourself to yourself, really. So to understand how the language works as a system, I felt I needed to be able to speak Uchinaaguchi, or to and to speak the local varieties of Uchinaaguchi that I was doing research on. And I had to speak it very well. And I still think that as a linguist, you ought to be able to speak the language that you're specializing in, to get a general feeling of the language, to know how it is to live in the language, to taste the culture and everything. Of course, when Misato approached me to help with the study group, and she said, yeah, you should teach, that was a whole different kind of pressure, because it's not my language, but still I felt responsible. You have a responsibility to, because all these Okinawans, all these Uchinanchu come to you with the expectation to learn the Uchinaaguchi that traditional speakers speak. Of course, I speak with a Dutch accent. That is one thing. The other thing is that, well, I know something about the Uchinaaguchi that I do research on. I don't know all the different local varieties. So what I ran into when we started doing the study group is, well, we sort of decided that we would use some kind of Uchinaaguchi doesn't really have a standard language. There is, the closest thing it has to a standard language is the language that is used in folk songs, which is really archaic and is quite far removed from the actual spoken Uchinaaguchi. Then there's also a lot of, I don't want to say problems, but let's just call it controversy. There's class differences in the way people speak. And of course, when we started the study group, reclaiming a language is also about, if it's all right for me to say this, it's also about appreciating what is yours. That is why you put that in the title of our story today. So what I mean by that is, we had one member from the very southern part of Okinawa, and he had learned or he had heard a lot of spoken Uchinaaguchi at home, and we were talking about, how do you say, what are you doing in Uchinaaguchi? So I said nusoga. And at one point he said, he didn't say nusoga, he said nuhichoga. And I said, no, it's nusoga. And afterwards, I found out that where he's from, they say nuhichoga. And I felt awful for correcting him, because I basically put the label of wrong on what is his own local variety of Uchinaaguchi. And so how are we supposed to deal with that kind of thing? I'm an outsider, so I can't be in charge of what is right and wrong. And also, in where Misato is from, they speak a kind of Uchinaaguchi that is different from all the surrounding villages. It's kind of special. Yeah. Yeah. So from the start, I always try to get Misato to speak Subi Kutuba, Subi Uchinaaguchi. if I get too much into this, it gets really esoterical. So maybe we can use the map here that that we sent to you. Can we see the map, please? Yeah.
Sorry, there's technical difficulties. This map
Okay.
does not want to pull up.
No problem. I'll try to keep it simple, and I'll just say it. So actually, the map gives a bit of a well, there were the same phrase in different local varieties of Uchinaaguchi. Here. Oh no. Okay. So the phrase "What are you doing?" in where Misato's from, they say "Nu hichoga" or "Nu sagiga." People from Naha and Shuri and large parts in the south central part of Okinawa, they say "Nu soga." But on Kumejima, where I started learning Uchinaaguchi, they say "Nu cheitsuga." And of course, that is not a matter of right or wrong. And you can't touch upon everything in a language class. However, what the method that we ended up developing was we would use one kind of greatest common denominator, Okinawan, and encourage everyone to look things up, to ask their family, also to sort of put a bit of pressure on them to interact with their own family members and local elders. It turned out that this method is actually, it already existed. So on Corsica in France, it's an island in nowadays in the southern part of France, where there's also a language shift and a language revival going on. And every locality in Corsica has their own version of the Corsican language, but they all know that they speak Corsican. No one would disqualify any other version of Corsican as not Corsican. And you see the same thing on Okinawa. They all speak Uchinaaguchi, but in different ways. There's no one who would say that the way people in Sobe speak is not Uchinaaguchi. So what we did was we while learning Uchinaaguchi, we tried to touch upon the parameters of language variation. So my position as a linguist, and doing lots of field work in different parts of Okinawa, it has helped me to sort of see patterns in regional variation. And without it becoming too linguistic-y, we found out ways in which we could convey that to the students as well, and that is actually something that from the start we found very important, especially as an outsider. It started from the whole idea of correcting people. You can't correct them if you can't tell someone from Sobe that their language is not good enough. Okay, let's start using Uchinaaguchi again, but not your Uchinaaguchi. Mm-hmm. So yeah, then what's the point of language revitalization? And I think that probably stems from my own insecurity as an outsider to correct people.
I like to think that there is just an arrogance that comes with Western academia. So it's a cornerstone trait of the Eurocentric ways of learning is that and the judgment placement is it's You know, it falls out of their processes, you know, even without any effort. You know, the whole dissertatorial research, you know, oftentimes, and you know, it's an interesting culture because we like to talk about non-bias kinds of research, but it begins in a bias within
Yeah.
a Euro. So the inquiry begins in a bias. So when we were learning Hawaiian language, same thing, exactly same thing. We used to have this teacher that would correct the elders that came in because they would say kapo'o instead of kipo'o. And he would say, oh, Tutu, you know, can you please use correct Hawaiian? And many of us who come from cultural families, saw that that was a faux pas, a huge faux pas. And we would just shrivel, you know, or that some of the students would come in and, you know, and they would say for vana, for an urchin. I remember the Kona students from the south of our island, or the west of our island, they would say wana. They wouldn't say vana, they would say wana. And sometimes they'll say, oh, you must be from the other side of the island, you know. And again, it makes people feel awkward. But I think it's a natural, I think if it's revitalizing the language is going to come through a Eurocentric process, as is linguistics, then there is the DNA of that platform is very arrogant. And yes, it can get people to speak a version of the language in 2 years, because that's how good our language program is. In 2 years, you can become quite fluent. But we have to be very awake to the fact that if our language is coming from the university system, we have to be aware that it also comes with that you know, that audacity sometimes, you know, and we don't realize that it's part of it. And so I think once we're awake to it, you know, then, because, you know, if that's the only way to revitalize the language, we need to take it, you know, but we just have to be aware so that we can minimize that. Now we have younger teachers, you know, that they're a whole lot more sophisticated, you know, and they've removed the judgment from the language acquisition, or they at least minimized it. Where there was a standardization. Interestingly, in Hawaii, the Hawaiian language was standardized by the standardization of the language was largely due for the promotion of Christianity. The missionaries were sent to different parts of the archipelago, and they were assigned to translate the Bible. And when they came together, they realized that people were speaking regionally different. So they began to standardize the language. And so sometimes the regionality got, you know, even within the language system, the regionality got kind of, you know, pushed down. But our younger professors are doing excellent jobs at being aware and awake to that arrogance that is innate to academia. You know, it's a trait that we need to be aware of, because if we're not aware of it, it could actually dismantle exactly what we're trying to, or worst case scenario, we create more colonizers that speak a dialect of some indigenous. And part of the language revitalization is to decolonize. Yeah, and so we got to be very aware of that. I am interested to know, can you please clarify, you're using the word study groups. Study group as is it like an informal gathering, or is it a course of a tuition bearing course? Is it a formal learning or a casual learning?
Both, yeah.
It's both at the same. Can I answer? Yeah. So it's for free, of course.
Okay.
And we do try to offer a formal course in the sense that it's a step-by-step approach towards fluency. So it's not just, let's say thank you, or let's say hello, or that kind of thing. No, it's actually we're building up the language with well, step by step, little pieces at the time. We do expect our participants. We do expect a certain commitment from our participants, showing up every time, because we do it as volunteers. So and the fact that they're not paying for it, it doesn't mean that they have to show some kind of courtesy in return for well, your efforts of planning and checking all the materials and everything. So it's both formal. It's formal, but it's for free. That's the idea.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. We don't want to charge them because we think that we don't want to force them to learn Uchinaaguchi. So yeah, we just want them to learn Uchinaaguchi for fun as a starter, and then make them think about what Uchinaaguchi to them. Yeah, so yeah, we don't want to charge them.
So, what is the future of Uchinaaguchi based on your work, your feeling, your emotion?
Future, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I can only speak for myself, but now I think many new generations are aware that Uchinaaguchi is endangered, but not so many of them actively learn Uchinaaguchi. Well, they maybe they don't know how to learn it, where to learn, what to do. But in the future, I wish that new generations can use Uchinaaguchi in their daily lives. And then for myself, before learning Uchinaaguchi, I just ended up seeing Japan as the reference point. How I talk, how I look, how I should behave. Learning Uchinaaguchi makes me feel more confident in my identity as an Uchinanchu. So yeah, but I can still relate to Japan. So this is a good thing. And then in the future, what's your future of Uchinaaguchi?
I don't know about. We'll keep using it for sure, and it's reassuring to see that there is an awakening going on right now. So I have good hope for the future of Uchinaaguchi. It will start very little, very grassroots, like we're doing. I like to think that what we're doing is grassroots, isn't it? But for the time being, I mean, I just see the huge amount of work that also I myself feel like I ought to do, I have to do. I mean, I have the as a linguist, I have the resources, I have the academic resources to, for example, to record lots of spoken Uchinaaguchi, not just ask questions about certain grammatical constructions, that kind of thing, things that basically only help my own academic pursuits, but also just traditional speakers talking to each other. That is such a valuable resource also for more advanced learners, to just listen how traditional speakers, how they talk to each other, their inflections, and natural conversation data is what we call that. We need lots of that. So that is what I'm trying to do right now. Of course, it's very difficult now with COVID-19 wreaking havoc also in Okinawa. So you have to be very careful not to be over enthusiastic there. But hopefully things will get better by the end of the year. I don't know, but we'll try and record as much as we can. There are still great Uchinaaguchi traditional speakers. They are still around, and lots of them are willing to help and are are willing they are open to being recorded when they speak. So yeah,
amazing. We my wife's grandfather is interesting. My wife, this was the father's side, so she didn't spend too much time there, and she never really heard her grandfather speak. Her paternal grandfather speak Hawaiian. Had no clue that he actually spoke Hawaiian. Her maternal side, yes, they lived in a Hawaiian language world. So no question there. It was the language of the home. But when we were in college, we became aware of, and this is in the 1980s, that her grandfather collected in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. He went around and just recorded conversations. He was talking with the old person and got their permission to record it. This was before the Hawaiian language revitalization movement, before the state of Hawaii, said yes. The Hawaiian language is one of the formal languages of Hawaii. Before all of that, he just recorded, and it was interesting to see my wife's reaction because she never heard her grandfather speak Hawaiian, and he didn't just speak Hawaiian. He spoke the way he held the words in his mouth was unlike the way he held the English language in his mouth. So there was a whole different character that was coming out of that. And it began there. There was a number of people that just, they weren't looking for sentence structures. They weren't looking for the linguistic aspects of it. They just knew that they needed to record it because one day another contributor will take it to the next level. And so it began there. We do have a question. A question is on, do you have moments when the language is the language of that space where someone can experience the language in an immersion process or in an immersion situation?
Should I answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have moments where we try to offer an immersive environment? Is that your question? Yeah. Okay. We try to do that as much as possible, especially in the advanced level of our course. We use only Uchinaaguchi, and we expect the participants to also get by using the Uchinaaguchi they already have. This is where maybe we can use the video.
Oh yeah.
So do you want to say what the video is
Oh yes,
perhaps?
right. So the immersion is a part of immersion program. So we went to Kume Island for so-called Uchinaaguchi camp. We stayed one night there. Study group members went to Kumejima and then stayed there for a night. And that time we were not allowed to use any languages other than Uchinaaguchi. So, and then it went very well. Yeah, everybody was trying to speak Uchinaaguchi as much as they can. And even we shared love stories in Uchinaaguchi. That sounds, very awkward. But after that, we got used to it. And then it was very nice. And then the video we are going to share right now is
number 2 or what number 3? Which one is it?
That was number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's the group members were having dinner, and then we were just doing yuntaku, chatting in Uchinaaguchi.
Yes, the video does not want to play either.
Oh, dear.
Oh, wait, no, yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
You know, I remember when part of our language acquisition, this is in my 20s, we're beginning to identify in a movement larger than just the individual, larger than just the single family, but this was a nation movement. So it kind of, the Lahui, the indigenous nation movement. So it gave us a bigger call, a calling. And so we were sent, we would do language camps and we could only speak Hawaiian. And it was, I don't know how we survived because you had to speak only in Hawaiian. If you couldn't, if anything, it taught us the value of communication. And when you don't have the right communication, nothing that matters to you gets considered. So, if just getting food, setting up your camp, all of those things required stuff that we didn't use in the classroom. It wasn't classroom language. Now you're in a real world. So it was, and our language faculty today, they're still using that. The importance of getting the student out of the classroom and into real living experiences and begin using the language there. Very awkward, but necessary. Pehea ke ia e no'eau, holo
Yep,
ana.
hiki.
Oh, hikino, okay. He's pressed the right button.
めたんよ、なんかそうそう、うちなぐちのレポート、うむ騒ぎさっさや、なんか YouTube とかし、なんか大和口市食レポソウル中、へえ。
じゃあ、annasi 우리チクラや。우치나구치習得便直会の YouTube チャンネル。チャンネルやな、チクテン。チクテン。So just to get a taste of the atmosphere, it was also a very important experience, I think, because it made us realize that this kind of immersive experience is also necessary, since the situation now with the language is so that a lot of people, they don't get to hear Uchinaaguchi in daily life anymore. Misa, you still heard a lot of Uchinaaguchi spoken at home,
right,
didn't you? So
yeah.
We're also moving well, basically our learning methods. We're trying to push them more towards more immersive learning patterns. So from the start, using only Uchinaaguchi, also to explain things. According to the principle of what's it called, comprehensible input. So using lots of gestures and pictures to get people to get used to saying things in Uchinaaguchi to mean something, not to answer a question, or not to answer an exercise. So yeah, I think that Uchinaaguchi camp that we did was very, very eye-opening.
Yeah, and successful. Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah, that the desperation people get when you remove the option language, when you remove an option for communication, and this is it. People reach deep, and they either they think simpler, they think in the terms that they can communicate. That's a huge shift. Because now you're coming down to essentials. How can you communicate the essentials? And so we do have a question. How are children, if any, the children of Okinawa, intersecting with Uchinaaguchi? Do you have opportunities where your program now intersects with the young ones, kindergartners, preschoolers, elementary school community members?
Yeah, I think there are some classes in kindergarten.
Well, not our program.
Not our program, but yeah. it's part of Okinawa government programs, I think. So
It is. So you are getting, can you speak a little bit about the government's contribution to the lifeline of Uchinaaguchi?
So I think Okinawa prefectural government created a strategy for advancement of Shimakutuba to preserve and promote Okinawan languages. So there's some classes about introducing Uchinaaguchi in kindergarten, junior high, and high schools. But I don't think there are as many as English or Japanese languages. Yeah, and also for us within the communities, yes, there are some grandparent generations provide young kids with some stories or just reading books in Uchinaaguchi or this kind of thing. Yeah.
It's all it's that kind of thing is only starting to catch on.
Yeah.
It's only starting to catch on. So you don't really have any formal Uchinaaguchi classes for children in primary schools, for example, in elementary schools in American English. So it's all very ad hoc, and
right.
It's not so immersive. I mean, we can't be too critical of it yet because it's only just starting. It's also why we, and this is something we've been talking about this week a lot, the two of us, that why we try to target people in their 20s and 30s mostly, because they are aware of the problem of language endangerment. And for children, if it's not a totally immersive experience, it might end up just being another thing at school that you have to do.
Correct.
So
yeah, so 20s, 30s, or 40s.
It has to start somewhere.
Yeah,
it has to start with somewhere. And so, you know, we're coming, ladies and gentlemen, in the room here. If you have questions, because we're going to be concluding soon. So ask your questions, and or just send them in the chat so we can have a record of it. The chat will be sent also to them. The starting with a community, and you say the 20s, because you know, and I like that you said we cannot get too critical in the early movements, because then we'll shoot ourselves in the toe. You know, this is where hope plays huge. The hope, the wishes, the prayers, the intentions have to be a whole lot more larger than than the concerns. You know, of course, you know, in Hawaii, they did already, the linguists at the time did tell us that it was already in the 80s, we had about 2,000 native speakers, and they said, it's a lost cause. The language is dead, you know, just throw in the towel. And luckily, you know, we were like, oh no, that was just a great challenge. You've just created a challenge. And we've done quite well. We can always do better, and we will be doing better. But you know, if anything, we learned a lot from what the Maoris were doing. And we borrowed what the Maori, you know, we have to borrow from each other, because we don't have the time to create a whole new wheel. You know, we don't have that luxury time. We have to sometimes borrow the wheels that have been created by our relatives in the ocean and begin using that. We don't have the option to doing away with academia. Academia now has not just an opportunity, but it has a responsibility to contributing to the life way of that community that institution is in. And that's what the University of Hawaii is attempting to do. And some days there's evidence that we're doing it, and then sometimes we feel like we're stepping back in time, you know. So it flux, and you know, it moves it forward and backwards. But definitely, we have a number of some of the beautiful things that are happening with the language are coming from the younger generations. You know, when we learned the language, it was about cultural revitalization, understanding who we are, what is ours, what is borrowed, what is pure, what is diluted. You know, we had to inventory the whole knowledge, do a knowledge inventory. Who in the community were able to do this and do that. It was just a huge canvassing of what was still alive and who was willing to share that. And that was part of the revitalization. People used the university to come back to relearn what typically was taught through the family system. But families, the knowledge went to sleep within the families because of colonization. But also, not just colonization, it was a way of protecting some of the sacred knowledge systems by minimizing who had access to them. You know, some of the knowledge systems we have never went to sleep, but they were just the people that knew of them were, they had to keep it from being threatened because it's a vulnerable piece of information of who we are. And now it's coming out, it's growing. So if anything we do, I personally know a number of talented Hawaiian language linguists in their 20s and 30s that are doing remarkable things. Interesting, this generation, it's not about cultural revitalization. They have a different need for the language. Ours was cultural revitalization, our generation. So we have curriculum that's focused on language revitalization, to be specific. But the younger generations, it's not about that anymore. It's about that, but it's about a whole lot more. So they come to the playground of language from a different angle with many more skills. And so I would love if there's an opportunity to introduce you or to create a platform where you guys can talk and converse and I say, hey, what's important to you now? Because language means different things to different levels of community. So let's continue that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our last mo kaulele for the season. And again, mo kaulele was really, it's a hook. So thank you for biting that hook. Like Rikyu, we're an island, so fishing plays large in that biting the hook, you want to get the good fish. And you bit the hook. The hook was come and look at the arts, come and look into the arts, come and look into the story of the artist, and but what the magic of this was in their telling of their story, we gave you an opportunity to revisit your story. So really, what is your metaphor? What is your calling? Every one of us, and I'm looking at all of these names, we all have a dream, and some of us had the opportunity to keep that dream alive. Some of us walked away from the dream and had to recover it. Misato-san talked about she had a dream stimulus, but it took her years to actually begin to step into it. For some of us, we've created a life to fulfill the dreams of other people, and we forgot our own storyline. Now, mo kaulele is a very poignant call to every one of us to look into that mirror and ask yourself, where's my dream? Where am I in this landscape of my dream? What's my contribution to the big story? Beyond being a mother, beyond being a father, beyond being a professor, a sister, a brother, a chief, a mentor. What's my contribution to the larger call of well-being? And no better time than today to begin to inventory what do we have and what can we contribute as an individual, but also as a collective to the well-being of the world, the global world. Hawaii can be very, very healthy, but if the next island next to us is very, very sick, that sickness is we're gonna be victims of it. It's a contagion. So we cannot have pockets of healthy communities. We have to have a healthy world to sustain that. So, Mo Kaulele is about, and lovely, and thank you, Misato-san and Heis, for sharing. I love that we have an indigenous that didn't necessarily get the support she was hoping to get. And then you have the foreigner who got the support that the indigenous wished they had. Isn't that an awkward? And we can laugh about it because we have to find humor. We have to find humor in this Okinawan way of humor. The Okinawa is known for sometimes their crude humor here in Hawaii. But it's a way of communicating a truth. And sometimes we need to rely on new ways. We shouldn't shut the door out to the new ways of learning, because to isolate ourselves is to really put ourselves in a bad situation. The beauty about art, we all have spirit, and the spirit, when there's the aesthetic, you ever wonder why in temples, churches, shrines, sacred spaces, there's always art, or there's always this natural energy, that the human, we try to mimic it and we call it art. But to mimic the beauty of nature in our dialect, our human dialect forms. But art is a bridge that connects the physical and the spiritual world. So Uchinaaguchi as an art form is what connects today's world to yesterday's world, so that we inform each other. We should never abort that. That's what colonization does. It aborts that connection. We gotta refuse it. And so, art is a beautiful way of becoming reacquainted again with one's own spirit, with the spirit of the community. Art is not a subject matter that we study in academics. It could be achieved there, but art is a way of thinking. Art is a way of speaking. Art is a way of feeling. So, and for us, Mo Kaulele was about bringing art forward so that we can remind people that the physical world is not all there is. There is this spiritual world. Find an art form that will connect both worlds, so that you can, as Misato has eloquently says, now that she's learning to speak Uchinaaguchi, she has a different awareness of herself. Not necessarily in the context or the judgments of Japan or Europe, but now when you learn your own language, you can begin to look at yourself from a base. And isn't that a beautiful ability to look at yourself in the mirror and see all these features, but also to recognize the primary foundation and say, I have not forgotten you. I have not forgotten you, and I'm going to keep you alive. In my time, I'm going to keep you alive. And whether it's cooking traditional food, speaking traditional language, creating traditional textiles, every one of us has an opportunity, whether it's a paid opportunity, tuition bearing, or free. It's there. Every day we have an opportunity to advance it. So I'm not sure if Mo Kaulele is going to continue next season, because it is actually funded by, it's extramural funding. So sometimes all the great things that we do, it has to come from extra outside support. So we're not sure where that support is, but we hope to continue some kind of conversation. It is our goal to be in Rikyu. We want to experience your space. And hopefully there's a time when you can come to Hawaii. And but again, friends, Misato and Hais, let me know if you want to continue this conversation. We have a lot of people that would love to have this conversation, because you have a piece of our puzzle. You have a piece that we need to complete our puzzle, and we have a piece for you to contribute. We can contribute to each other's well-being. Thank you guys very, very much. Just simply mahalo.
Thank
And,
you.
and I'm hoping that this continues, sharing stories. And Gail McCool, Connie London, are you still there? Can we see you?
I'm still here.
So everybody, this is Gail. I didn't want to end Mokaulele without letting you hear her voice. Gail, can you please, from your vantage point, can you share with us, what is your vision for a healthy indigenous Hawaii as it relates to the indigenous world?
Excellent. My goodness, that's a interesting question. I think for me, so I've been at this, and I guess I'll share that. I've been at this for almost over 36 years here at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And when I came here, our concern back then was about the underrepresentation of Native Hawaiians in higher education. And our goal back then was to ensure that Native Hawaiians had access to the university. And then they would have also access to learning their language, and then to begin to participate in being the next generation of people who then can begin to educate our community. And I think that to me is still something that I think is important. We need to have generations of our indigenous people educate the next generation. Because if we don't, we may end up in a situation where we lose our language, we lose our culture, and we begin to lose the people who have the knowledge who can transmit this to the future. So I think that by doing things like this, what we just did today, is a way of us as indigenous peoples of the world to begin to make sure that our communities and our people are healthy and thriving into the future.
And interestingly, because we have to grow the sustainability, we truly believe that everybody in Hawaii let's not use ethnicity as an option out. Everybody in Hawaii should have, ideally speak Hawaiian in varying degrees, understand the indigenous life ways, and advocate it. And so that if we were to live anywhere in the world, we'll follow suit, that same practice that, we now live in this community. How do we contribute to the language of that community? We have to become contributors, because if we don't contribute, then we exploit. And exploitation can only go so far before it does great harm. So who of us that sometimes we don't identify as indigenous, what room is there for us to participate in things that are indigenous? Well, we can't, we have to wake up the indigenous in everyone. That's part of the big call, is that everyone does have some indigenous origin. Choose one, and let's begin there. But, part of growing indigenous Hawaii is making room for people to wake up their own indigeneity, and then contribute on using that as a bridge to contribute to Hawaii. So but it is not exclusive. We're not talking about an exclusive movement. We're talking about an inclusive movement. And it's just a way of thinking and contributing. So we hope to have this conversation again. Congratulations to the language of Rikyu, because, we still have that. We need to celebrate that. In fact, tonight you guys should go out and have a drink and say, yes, it's alive and it's growing, and we're going to create songs because of it and dances because of it. Everyone else, thank you. Have a good evening. We hope the next time you pass a mirror, have a good look at yourself and say thank you. And you know, and ask the deep questions, ask the big questions. Yeah. Have a good day, everyone. Ahui ho. Heis and Misato-san, can you please stay on board? We will exit everyone out. Thank you, everyone. Mahalo anui. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Hi.
In
Oh, I see some of us.